All good things must come to an end. Coming up next, it's our final countdown of our top 10 songs of each year. We've covered every year from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and we have one left. Can you guess the final year? It was a monumental year, including a nervous legend who vomited every take that she did while recording a song that pretty much outdid any male rocker of the time. Also, the last great song from a legend who died in a plane crash just after releasing his signature tune, as well as a psychedelic classic that wouldn't have happened if the lead singer liked his mother-in-law even a little bit. Then there's a famous song with a secret cuss word that I got in huge trouble for even mentioning it on my radio show for fear of getting fined by the big boys. I'll tell you about it. As well as the creepiest song of all time, sung by the weirdest pop star of all time. See if you agree with me. It's the countdown, our final one, coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if your first record player came from Fisher-Price, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Remember those? Like the purple and pink and orange records. Make sure to subscribe below right now. I know you'll find something to dig on this channel. We've got some amazing interviews coming up and stories. We also have a podcast you're going to want to check out on Apple and Spotify. Make sure to rate us and follow us there. So it was an intense year with the deaths of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy. Richard Nixon shockingly won the presidency, and the infamous Tet Offensive escalated the war in Vietnam. And at the movies Planet of the Apes and 2001 A Space Odyssey fascinated filmgoers. And in music, it was a year of wild improvisation and psychedelia. Some of the greatest tracks of the rock era. Have you guessed the year yet? Well, we're going to take the time machine back to 1968. Our countdown to the top 11 songs of 68 begins with Simon and Garfunkel. Mrs. Robinson at number 11. Yeah, the summer of 68 was a time of social upheaval, cultural shifts, and rock bands pushing boundaries. It was during that vibrant era that Simon and Garfunkel released Mrs. Robinson, a song that would become one of the most iconic tracks of their entire career and a staple of American pop culture, let's be clear. Mrs. Robinson was originally written for the soundtrack of the film, for The Graduate, right? A movie that perfectly embodied the anxieties and rebellious spirit of its time, really pushing the envelope, especially in those times.
Robinson, you're trying to seduce me. Aren't you?
Director Mike Nichols approached Simon and Garfunkel to create a song that reflected the film's themes of youthful disillusionment and societal change. Plastics, right?
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
They initially penned Mrs. Robinson as a playful, slightly satirical tribute to the film's character, Mrs. Robinson, an older woman who symbolizes temptation and societal expectations. I'm going deep here. Mrs. Robinson was actually recorded very quickly. It was a couple of days before the film's release. Paul Simon famously said that the lyrics were inspired by a mix of personal observations and the cultural atmosphere of the late 60s, with lines that subtly referenced the movie's characters, also the themes, but also carried deeper meaning about rebellion and disillusionment. And of course, Joe DiMaggio, where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio, not using Mickey Mantle because of syllables. People ask, why didn't you say Mickey Mantle? Because he was the hero of the time. Where have you gone, Mickey Mantle? And Paul Simon said, syllables. It's all about syllables. Joe DiMaggio worked better. And so anyway, besides Joe DiMaggio, though, there were so many more memorable parts. In fact, this is kind of interesting. One of the most memorable parts of Paul's composition is the cuckoo Ka-Choo, Mrs. Robinson line. It was my kids' favorite when they were little. They used to sing it all the time. So get this. Paul Simon actually lifted that from I Am the Walrus by the Beatles, except he misheard John Lennon's lyric, mistaking Goo Goo Gajoob as John wrote it for Cuckoo Ka-Choo. So he ripped off a Beatles misheard lyric, turned it into a #1 hit. Now, if you remember, Bobby Hart, who wrote for the Monkees, did the same thing with Paperback Writer, thinking they were saying take the last train when they were saying paperback, and he turned that into the #1 smash, Last Train to Clarksville. Take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. 2 #1 hits from misheard lyrics from rival bands. The Beatles, gotta love it. All right, next up at number 10 on the countdown, we have Piece of My Heart by Big Brother and the Holding Company, featuring the great Janis Joplin. Piece of My Heart was originally written by Jerry Ragavoy and Burt Burns in the early 60s, intended for other artists. It was a soulful ballad about heartbreak and vulnerability. It was perfectly suited for Janis's emotional style. Now, when Big Brother and the Holding Company decided to record it in 1968, it was clear they had something really special. But what made it extraordinary was Janis's raw, visceral delivery. Janis was known for her emotional intensity, but she was also very nervous when she got to the studio for the recording session, so much so that she threw up in the bathroom between takes multiple times. According to those in the know, she was so overwhelmed by the song's emotional weight that she had difficulty getting through the vocals at first, repeatedly returning to the bathroom, doing a take, running to the bathroom, vomiting. However, once she tapped into her own personal pain and her own vulnerability, her performance erupted into the iconic, unforgettable delivery we know today. I mean, her vocal growls, her trembling inflection, she poured her soul into the performance, her whole soul, making listeners feel every ounce of pain and longing. I mean, it was the first time a female had growled with such rock and roll ferociousness that really could give any frontman a run for their money at that time. Nobody sings like Janis Joplin anymore, or before that.
You know you got it if it makes you feel good. Oh, yes.
The song's chorus with her commanding cry of "Take another little piece of my heart now, baby," that became an anthem of defiant vulnerability. Big Brother and the Holding Company with Janis Joplin peaked at number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. Cruising in at number 9 of the top 11 songs of 68, we've got the great Otis Redding with Sitting on the Dock of the Bay.
Sitting on the dock of the bay.
You know, Otis Redding was a young man at the height of his fame in 1967. He was feeling the weight of life's uncertainties. He was a man driven by soulful passion, pouring his heart into every note, every single lyric. But despite his success, Otis was restless. He was yearning for change. He was longing for a new sound, a new direction. Little did he know he was about to leave behind a song that would become his eternal legacy.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting.
Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, that was born out of a moment of reflection and melancholy. Otis, inspired by his feelings of displacement and longing, was experimenting with new musical ideas. He recorded a demo with songwriter Steve Cropper of Booker T and the MGs in late 1967, just before a tragic accident cut his life short. What could have been if Otis would have lived, man. What many don't realize is that Otis actually recorded a rough, incomplete version of Sitting on the Dock of the Bay during that session.
Watching the ships roll in.
I mean, the song's haunting, relaxed vibe, that came from his improvisations, a spontaneous blend of lyrics and melody that captured his mood perfectly. The famous whistling at the end of the track, that was Otis himself. He just improvised that during the recording. He felt like it, he did it. It added a personal touch of whimsical vulnerability there. Just days after recording the song, Otis Redding tragically died in a plane crash in Madison, Wisconsin. His untimely death cast a shadow over the song's release, but it also immortalized it. Sitting on the Dock of the Bay became his farewell, a soulful goodbye that captured the essence of a man who was still searching. Fittingly, the song rose to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, as well as the R&B chart.
Wasting time.
You know, the best time to listen to the tune at number 8 on our top 11 songs of 68 is in the cool of the evening when everything is getting kind of groovy. That's when it's time for Spooky. Spooky by Classics 4.
Love is kind of crazy with a spooky little girl like you.
The lyrics for Spooky were written by two fishing buddies, Buddy Bew and James J.R. Cobb Jr., both talented songwriters with a flair for creating atmospheric, evocative music. Buddy and JR put their lyrics over the melody of the spooky instrumental that was composed by Mike Shapiro and Harry Middlebrooks Jr. that was released as a single in 1967. Get this. This was a saxophone instrumental. Shapiro and Middlebrooks, their instrumental stalled at number 57 on the Billboard Hot 100. So they took this cool instrumental and they put lyrics to it. And boy, did that make all the difference.
Everything is getting kind of groovy.
When the song took on those catchy lyrics, it summoned a sense of longing and mystery and the supernatural, like a ghostly presence whispering in the night.
And then you smile and hold my hand.
But here it was cleverly presented in a narrative that made listeners stop. And it just had that 60s vibe to it. And it's just such a cool song. Now, the reimagined version of Spooky by Classics 4 was recorded with a lush arrangement featuring a gentle guitar, soft percussion, haunting vocal harmonies, and really a Roy Orbison-like lead vocal delivery by the late Dennis Yost, who actually passed away in 2008. During recording, the band aimed to create an otherworldly atmosphere, even adding subtle sound effects. You know, there's echoes and reverb to enhance a ghostly feel, and you definitely feel it in this song. Spooky by Classics 4 quickly became a hit. It went to number 3 in the Billboard Hot 100, and it went to number 1 in Canada as a staple of the 60s psychedelic and pop landscape. Perfectly, man. When Classics 4 disbanded, J.R. Cobb and his Classics 4 bandmate Dean Daughtry, they co-founded the Atlanta Rhythm Section, and actually Spooky had a renaissance with a rockin' reboot by IRS. It actually went to number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1979, so it was a hit in the 60s and 70s. So we've reached a point in the countdown of the top 11 songs of 68 where I invite you to take my hand and enter a confusing place called In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. It's where we find song number 7 by Iron Butterfly. The late 60s was an era of experimentation and mind-expanding drugs and shattering musical boundaries for sure. Into this world stepped Iron Butterfly, a band eager to push the limits of rock and roll. And from their wild psychedelic sessions emerged a song that would become one of the most iconic, yet most misunderstood tracks of the era, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. I mean, forget about how hard it is to pronounce. It's one of the hardest hit singles to spell. And it began with a simple mistake during a heavy drinking session where lead vocalist Doug Ingle was trying to say "in the Garden of Eden." But of course, he was tipsy, intoxicated, perhaps overwhelmed by the swirling chaos of that moment, and he slurred his words into In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. The phrase stuck, and the band decided to name their epic song after it. Doug Ingle later revealed that the phrase was originally intended as a joke, an inside joke among friends. But the band members loved it. They loved the way it sounded. It was mysterious. It was alien. A little goofy as well, so they kept it. Over time, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida became a symbol of the psychedelic age, even though most listeners had no clue what it meant. A lot of people point to this as the first heavy metal song. There's a couple of those in this countdown. Now, the song itself is a sprawling 17-minute odyssey filled with swirling guitars, hypnotic bass lines, and droning drums. It's a sonic trip for sure. Intense, layered, and hypnotic. The recording process was as wild as the song itself, though. I mean, the band was experimenting with new sounds, and some of the guitar riffs played by Eric Brenton and others were improvised right on the spot, capturing a raw, chaotic energy that defined the track. In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly became a massive hit. It reached the top 30 on the charts and instantly became a staple of the psychedelic era. Top 30 doesn't sound like a lot, it's not a very big hit. But it's actually the biggest selling record of all time for quite a few years. A drunken, babbled title from a one-hit wonder that was 17 minutes long and it outsold everything for years. Think about that. You can't make this stuff up.
Please take my hand.
Its deliberate cryptic phrase, though, became synonymous with the 60s counterculture and inspired countless bands and is often cited as a prime example of the psychedelic rock movement as well as the beginnings of heavy metal. All right, at the number 6 spot on the countdown, the top 11 songs of 68, we call upon Mr. Hendrix to tell us about his version of the story of the Joker and the Thief and All Along the Watchtower. Man, Jimi Hendrix's interpretation of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower was such an inspired rendition, maybe the greatest cover of all time. I mean, it's hard to imagine the track in any other form. Not only was it one of the best of 68, it's one of the best of the rock era. I mean, Jimi transformed Bob's composition into a psychedelic masterpiece, a rock and roll phenomenon.
There must be some kind of way out of here.
I mean, Bob Dylan's version was cool. It was sparse. It was a poetic folk song filled with cryptic images and layered meanings. But when Jimi first heard it, he was fascinated. So much so that he imagined the track traveling beyond the folk roots. He imagined a canvas, a playground for his revolutionary guitar work. Jimi's All Along the Watchtower features an extended incendiary guitar solo and has become one of the most celebrated moments in rock history, for sure. Jimi famously played the guitar solo with his teeth, and of course behind his back during performances. But in the studio, he used a variety of experimental techniques, like manipulating the guitar's pickups and using his whammy bar to produce those iconic squeals and bends. Despite the burgeoning popularity of his rendition, Jimi was initially unsure if he was doing justice to Bob Dylan's lyrics. He once said in interviews that he saw himself as a storyteller, using his guitar as his voice primarily. His interpretation was less about copying, though, and more about expressing the emotional core that he felt in the song. It was an act of artistic liberation. Jimi was always very respectful and appreciative of what Bob gifted, and he felt privileged to have the opportunity to follow his vision and create an entirely new track from it. Of course, when Bob Dylan first heard Jimi's reimagining of All Along the Watchtower, he said he was overwhelmed, believing that Jimi found elements in the song that no other musician would have ever found. In fact, Bob Dylan, a lot of you probably know this, but he changed the way he did it from that point forward to mimic Jimi's version to the T. Now that we got our motor running, the countdown races on with a thrill ride by Steppenwolf at number 5 with Born to be Wild.
Born to be wild.
1968 was a distinctive year because it was a time of social freedom and rebellion. Adventure on the open road became a symbol of the desire to achieve that freedom. Among the anthems that capture that spirit, one song stands out for me. Born to be Wild by Steppenwolf.
Head out on the highway, looking for adventure.
But behind his roaring guitars and rebellious lyrics lies a story as wild and intriguing as the song itself. I mean, it's interesting that Born to be Wild is often credited as the first heavy metal song. That's the second song in this countdown. There's another one coming. One thing we can all agree on, though, is they were the first to sing the word heavy metal in a rock song. As a descriptor of the song's powerful, thunderous sound, the term heavy metal thunder in verse 2 was an incredible description. It had mind-boggling impact on the imagination of a generation, let's be clear.
Heavy metal thunder.
Born to be Wild, that was written in 1968 by a guy named Mars Bonfire, songwriter for Steppenwolf. Originally inspired by a motorcycle trip Bonfire took with his friends, the song was conceived as a celebration of the biker lifestyle, an ode to freedom, speed, and living on the edge. Its raw power and gritty attitude quickly resonated with the counterculture movement. Despite its eventual association with motorcycles and rebellion, though, Mars originally wrote the song as a slow ballad. It was just a slow song that was, like I said, going to be a ballad. But John Kay, lead singer of Steppenwolf, and the band sped it up and brought some heaviness to it, making it boom. And even though the song originally had more of a literal focus on motorcycle riding, Steppenwolf's manager suggested emphasizing the broader theme of living freely, which helped the song resonate beyond just motorcyclists. Now, Mars once joked that he was surprised the song didn't get banned for its raw, unfiltered, almost insurgent attitude. Born to be Wild, as much as any song in history, became a pop cultural phenomenon, when it was used as the theme for the hit film Easy Rider. That is just iconography.
Looking for adventure and whatever comes our way.
As a single, the Steppenwolf's classic went to #1 in Canada and #2 on the Billboard Hot 100, one of the best #2s ever. Onward we go, on with a Crossfire Hurricane from the Stones at #4 on the countdown of the top 11 of 68. I've got Jumpin' Jack Flash. The song that started the 70s in 1968. It's not a stretch to say it's the song that really invented the term classic rock. Inside a smoky studio, late in the evening, the Stones were restless, searching for a sound, an edge that would take them into the next phase of their career. They were ready to move forward. And then out of nowhere, they heard a ruckus outside the window. It was this mysterious figure of this guy jumping in and out of view. Was it a criminal? Was it a peeping Tom? No. It was the gardener, a strange dude named Jack Dyer, who not only inspired the band's new sound, but one of the greatest rock songs ever from a kooky gardener. For sure. I mean, how many other songs come from a kooky gardener? I'm sure there's a couple. The song was so raw and charged with mystery, it felt like it was conjured from another realm. Let's be clear, in 1968, that was a cool sound. Now, the real Jumpin' Jack Flash didn't get a bonus or even part of the royalties for inspiring the song, but Keith Richards did give his son an award that he'd won, the Bravo Otto Award, a prestigious German accolade recognizing outstanding performers in film, television, and music. But the Stones took Jumpin' Jack Flash to #1 in Germany, Australia, Holland, New Zealand, and the UK. Here in the Billboard Hot 100, the single went all the way to #3. All right, making the countdown to the top 11 songs of 68 at #3. I've got one of the coolest songs ever. It's Pictures of Matchstick Men, one of the defining tracks of the psychedelic era by the trailblazing band Status Quo. And Pictures of Matchstick Men, what a doozy. It was written by the band's bassist and guitarist Francis Rossi and lead singer Rick Parfitt. And the song was inspired by Rossi's fascination with the visual illusions and surreal imagery of the psychedelic movement. This thing's a musical kaleidoscope. Distorted, hypnotic, kind of eerie. It's designed to evoke the feeling of a hallucinogenic trip. I mean, that's crazy how influential, mind-altering drugs were in the 60s, even for those of us who've never taken such a drug. The song still plays with our brains as if we did. The signature riff of Matchstick Men was originally conceived as a musical joke, though. Rossi and Parfitt were experimenting with different sounds in the studio, and Rossi came up with the riff while trying to mimic a hypnotic swirling effect. He had no idea what he was doing. He just started following a simple hypnotic pattern. Yet it had an almost magnetic pull, is what he said. Rossi and Parfitt were surprised by what they had accidentally created. The band decided to build the song around that improvised sound, and the riff became one of the most recognizable hooks in rock history. During the recording session, the band used a fuzz tone on the guitar that was achieved by running the instrument through a Vox wah pedal, creating that distinctive distorted sound. It's so cool. The track's haunting melody was partly inspired by Rossi's interest in Eastern philosophy and mysticism, added a spiritual dimension to it for sure. I mean, this song in 1968 especially, it sounded like a whole other world. Now, Rossi confessed that the reason he was in the studio that very day and the inspiration came to him was not from a burning desire to be innovative. It was actually to get away from his mother-in-law, who was staying with Francis and his wife. Apparently, Francis and his mother-in-law didn't get along at all. So in weird ways, his mother-in-law is what fueled the creativity of Pictures of Matchstick Men. Pictures of Matchstick Men was a breakthrough for Status Quo. When it came out as a single, it sounded like nothing sounded like it, even in the era of psychedelia. Pictures of Matchstick Men steadily grew to hit status. It climbed to #7 in Germany and the UK chart, #5 in Switzerland, #3 in the Netherlands. and crossing over to America, landing at number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. Such a cool song. Coming in at number 2 on the countdown of the top 11 of 68, we have a track anchored by another iconic guitar riff. It's the runner-up spot, but it's the superstar trio of Cream with Sunshine of Your Love. Sunshine of Your Love is yet another miracle of improvisation. The 60s were full of that stroke of genius. It was during a band rehearsal that Eric Clapton recalled trying to zero in on a groove that would do the lyrics justice. The riff was reportedly derived from a slow blues progression, but the band pushed it into a heavier, more hypnotic groove. But you gotta credit Jack Bruce because that riff actually came from his bass. One of the most important, most explosive guitar riffs ever, and it actually started out on the bass, so there's that. That's very interesting. The song's structure was intentionally minimalistic, focusing on that one riff, building tension with rhythm and dynamics just perfectly. The unmistakable wah-wah sound in the intro, that was achieved not with a wah pedal actually, but by Clapton using a Vox Clyde McCoy wah-wah pedal in a very specific way, rolling it back and forth to create that swirling psychedelic effect. I mean, it was a simple technique, but it added an extra layer of hypnotic texture to the riff.
It's getting near dawn.
Very apropos for the soundtrack of 1968. For his guitar solo, Clapton delivered what he called a woman tone that was dark, smooth, and seductive. Pete Brown, who was a lyricist and poet behind many of their songs, he was inspired by a line from a Jimi Hendrix concert. I guess Hendrix had shouted, "You're the sunshine of my love" to his girlfriend. And Pete took that phrase and crafted the lyrics and turned it into a love song wrapped in a catchy, almost mystical groove. Ironically, Eric Clapton was initially hesitant about the lyrics. He felt that they were too simplistic, but they proved to be perfect for the song's vibe. Even more iconic is that no one, especially the record label, thought that the song would even be a hit. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20, but it's just lunacy to me. When you hear the song, you know. Why the trained ears of a label A&R person didn't hear Sunshine of Your Love as a smash is just beyond me. In fact, golden-eared legend Ahmet Ertegun called it psychedelic hogwash. It wasn't Cream's highest charting single in the UK. It actually crested at number 25. But Sunshine of Your Love was the song that broke him here in America, rising to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and in Canada. It actually ascended even higher in Canada, went to number 3. And like I said, another song that many point to as the inventor of heavy metal, first heavy metal song. So what do you think of the 3 we mentioned? What's the first heavy metal song?
In the sunshine of your love.
I'm probably going to piss some people off with my number 1 pick here, but anyway, before I reveal my pick of the number 1 song in 1968, I do want to do a special spotlight of a song that didn't make the countdown, but I'm going to give it a special award as the creepiest single release in that year, or in the decade for that matter. One of the weirdest of the rock era. I'm talking about Tiptoe Through the Tulips by Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim, born Herbert Buckingham's Quarry. He was a performer who embraced the underground and the truly bizarre. He dressed in Victorian-era clothing, he played a ukulele, and he sang with a high-pitched falsetto that sounded like a cross between an elderly woman on nitrous oxide and a Looney Tunes cartoon character. That's how I bridged the gap there. So apparently Tim said that he discovered he could sing in a very high register while listening to Rudy Vallee, his records as a kid.
For I'm just a vagabond lover.
And he really enjoyed it, even though he could also adeptly shift down to a low baritone. He preferred singing in a piercing falsetto. That was his gig. Tim's version of Tiptoe Through the Tulips became a surprise hit, thanks in part to its strange charm and the novelty factor behind it. It's one of those songs that when you hear it, you just can't believe what you're hearing.
I kiss you in the garden,
And you inexplicably keep listening to it. It's the musical version of a train wreck. You know, you're rubbernecking to hear it. Tiny Tim's rendition of the old vaudeville tune from 1929 that was written by Al Dubin and Joe Burke was so odd that it became a pop culture staple. He appeared on The Tonight Show and appeared in movies and commercials and all over the place. It was used in the 1969 film Mona Lisa, and for many it became a symbol of the weird, whimsical side of the 60s counterculture. Tiptoe Through the Tulips actually hit number 17 on the charts and is now more popular than it was then. It's music to thousands of memes to create that creepy feeling. Tim died of a heart attack in 96 at age 64, actually, Tiny Tim. Now, placing at the summit of the top 11 songs of 68 Countdown, my number one, I'm going with Hey Jude by the Beatles. Haters hate.
Hey Jude, don't make it bad.
It all started with Paul McCartney's desire to comfort John Lennon's son Julian during his parents' divorce. 5-year-old Julian was very upset and confused about that separation, and Paul wanted to offer him some words of encouragement to help him get through the ordeal. Originally, most of you know, the song is called Hey Jules. It was a gentle message to Julian to cheer him up.
Don't be afraid.
But over time, Paul expanded the lyrics, turning into a broader message of solace for anyone going through tough times.
To make it better.
The song was recorded in a single session that lasted over 16 hours. Can you imagine that? Just going for 16 hours straight. To achieve the warm, soulful sound, though, the Beatles recorded at Abbey Road Studios, layering multiple tracks of the vocals and instruments. McCartney famously insisted on capturing a natural, really spontaneous feel, which is why the song's relaxed, almost spontaneous vibe feels so genuine.
The minute you let her under your skin.
Now, this famous extended coda na na na, you know, the part that everybody sings along to, that wasn't actually part of the original plan. It was actually improvised on the spot during recording. It was a way to keep the mood light and give the musicians a chance to relax. They were kind of messing around with it. Producer George Martin suggested extending the song, and Paul decided to make the chorus a memorable sing-along, which ended up being the song's most iconic feature, maybe the most iconic sing-along of all time in a song. Now, famously, George Martin, he was worried that radio was never going to play the song because it was over 7 minutes long. This was in the time of 3 minutes or die. But John showed his confidence when he said, well, they will if it's us. And he was exactly right. Then, of course, in the song's final bridge section at 2 minutes and 58 seconds, a spoken profanity is uttered by John Lennon after he mistakenly sings the wrong lyric during his background vocals on the last verse. Lennon saying let her into instead of let her under your skin. And in frustration, John yells, oh, you know, the F-bomb. The recording engineer, Ken Scott, admitted that the profanity was brought to his attention, but he couldn't hear it. It was subtle, but it was a very real F-bomb. It was left in the final mix. It bled through on the background vocal track, and it's never been removed. Now, it's not clear. You can't hear it unless you have really good ears, but you can hear it if you put on a good pair of headphones. It's there. But actually, funny story, I got in big trouble for pointing this out on my radio show. I have this syndicated radio show that's in like 30-something markets. And I had to re-record the part where I talked about this and then played the song over worries that you-know-who would fine the station for playing the song knowing there was an F-bomb in it. I mean, if that's true, every station in the country would owe billions of dollars because this song's been played so much. Isn't that funny? I got in trouble. Like, they're like, don't talk about that because if they hear it, that's just crazy. Of course, this was the Beatles' biggest song ever. Spent 9 weeks at number one on the Billboard Hot 100. So the worries of being over 7 minutes long, not a big worry. One of the best-selling singles of all time. What started as a simple gesture of kindness to a young boy, it grew into a song that comforted millions. Its heartfelt message, its spontaneous creation, and timeless melody of cemented Hey Jude is not just a hit single, but a cultural phenomenon. That's why we crown it as the number one song in 1968. So, you know, people hate on me when I give the Beatles a number one. I've given them a couple of number ones in these countdowns. But that's it. I mean, I was wrong. I didn't do every year in the 60s. I went 1965 to 1989. Now we've covered every year in there. Should we stop? Should we do 64, 63? Should we do one for the 50s? Maybe just the top 20 overall for the 50s? Should we do them for the 90s? Should we start going to 91, 92, 93, 94. 94 is where it started to go haywire, in my opinion. But let me know below. Would you like to see more of these countdowns going in the 90s, the 50s, and early 60s? Let me know. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. Talk to you soon.